Eco Money on Money FM 89.3.
You're listening to Eco Money on Money FM 89.3. I'm Rachel Kelly. Now, an unprecedented 128,000 millionaires are expected to relocate worldwide this year. That's according to the latest report from Henley and Partners. The Great Migration comes as the world grapples with a perfect storm of geopolitical tensions, economic uncertainty, and social upheaval. Millionaires are voting with their feet in record numbers. And now, another factor is increasingly weighing on the minds of the wealthy when it comes to residency, and that is climate change. To find out more, we're joined now by Dominic Volek, who's the Group Head of Private Clients at Henley and Partners. Dominic, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Good to have you with us. Dominic, I recently found out, as you've just shared before we started recording, that we're both based in Dubai. And we recently spoke about some of the climate events that have taken place in the Middle East. And obviously, we're now setting into full swing of summer where things are really heating up. I've escaped to Scotland for the summer where things not so much heating up. I'm looking outside my window and we have a yellow weather warning for rain. So we talk about the climate quite frequently, obviously, on Eco Money. But interesting, I'd love to hear from you more about how climate change is impacting millionaire migration.
Yeah, so it's definitely become more of a factor in terms of where people consider moving to, or I suppose more having the option to move to if they need to. So a while ago, we created a sort of a climate change resilience index where we looked at all the countries around the world that offer some form of investment migration. So, there's a number of countries around the world that will give residence or citizenship to individuals in return for some type of economic investment. Sometimes it's a contribution, maybe it's job creation, but successful entrepreneurs, business people, investors are able to invest or contribute to a number of countries around the world and in return get residence and citizenship. And so we looked at those countries. There's probably about 40 countries globally that have successful, attractive, and well-run investment migration programs. And so we looked at those against the backdrop of their sort of climate change resilience. So not only the country's vulnerability to the impact of climate change, but also the country's sort of wealth, GDP, in terms of its ability to adapt to such risks. And so that of course was quite an interesting analysis. There's a number of reasons why wealthy people look to acquire residence and citizenship by investment. And climate change resilience is one of those reasons. It could be tax, it could be access to better education or business opportunities or healthcare, but certainly climate change resilience is something that's come about. Originally, it actually came from a discussion I had with one of the private banks in India. And so it was certain clients in India that were asking the question around climate change resilience and which countries can I easily get access to, not necessarily next year, but maybe in 10, 20, 50 years time, because of course things will change a lot in that time and wealthy people want to hedge against all these types of risks.
So where should they look to? How did you advise them? What topped your charts when you were looking at those 40 countries and all the different dynamics, from investment schemes to climate resiliency to how prepared the government is?
So the key is, as I said, we're not just looking at who's vulnerable, but also their ability to adapt to it. And that comes with, the wealth of the country. So I guess those countries that have higher resilience are those like the US, Switzerland, Canada, Australia, where they're significant economies. And also, of course, a lot of these countries, as I mentioned, do have investment migration programs available. So in the US, you have the EB-5 visa, which is an $800,000 investment, which you would get returned to you through a project, but in return for making that investment, you get a green card to the US. In Switzerland, another sort of country that has a higher resilience, they have a lump sum taxation system, which is also incredibly interesting. If you're a very high taxpayer, to become a resident of Switzerland through their lump sum taxation is also very interesting. You not only benefit from having access to a country that is more resilient to climate change risks, but also interesting from a tax perspective, which of course is an important factor for high net worth individuals. Canada's another one. Canada has an investor program. They have startup visas that are available where you can become permanent resident. Australia historically has had a number of investor visas also available. However, that's sort of under review at the moment, but they do still have a very interesting global talent visa as well. So a lot of these countries are not only interested in investors and capital coming in order to return, to provide residence or citizenship, but they're also interested in talents and skills. And certainly here in the UAE and Dubai particularly, they have a very successful golden visa scheme, which again, you can get it, you can get 10-year residence here by investing into real estate, but they're also after, highly skilled and talented individuals, which can also get the golden visa here.
You mentioned migration discussion came about from a conversation that you had with a client in India. Do you see these kind of conversations increasing? Obviously, you've done an analysis, but how frequent would you say they've become?
Yeah, it's more and more. It's not the primary concern in terms of most discussions we have. If you look at why wealthy people migrate, move to another country, as I said, tax is, of course, always a consideration, trying to, physically relocating to another jurisdiction that's more attractive in terms of taxation. Again, we see a sort of a large exodus of wealthy people out of the UK. That started, 2017 around Brexit, but now they're talking about, they're talking about changing what was a very attractive tax scheme, their resident non-domicile tax scheme. So that pushes people out. And then if you look at the alternatives, there's the UAE with no inheritance tax, no capital gains tax, no income tax. So tax is definitely a feature. And of course, access to just a better lifestyle, whether it's from a climate perspective, schooling, healthcare, safety and security. There's a lot of jurisdictions where that is a significant concern and more around the world. So there's a number of countries that manage those aspects very well that attract these millionaires. And so, I think to answer your question, it's not the most important factor, but depending on where our clients are based, it is certainly a topic that has become a lot more prevalent in those discussions, I would say, over the last 4 or 5 years.
And as you mentioned, it's becoming perhaps more competitive to attract these millionaires globally. You've highlighted the golden visa in the UAE and a number of other tax schemes. What should countries be looking at or should be doing to make themselves perhaps more competitive to attract these millionaires on the move?
So it is a very competitive space now. Every year more countries launch programs as part of our business. We operate sort of on both sides of the industry. So on the one hand, we work with wealthy families around the world, advising them on how and where to acquire residence and citizenship by investment. But we're also very busy on the government side. So we strategically, advise governments on how to actually create these programs, how to design and implement them and make sure that the due diligence is right. And then, of course, to also design them in a way that brings significant benefits to the country. So it's really, we sort of coined the term sovereign equity, right? Is that if you structure these programs and they're attractive enough, and as a country you offer lifestyle benefits, interesting tax schemes, then of course you are able to attract these millionaires. And this is what we've seen. Globally, we see the movement of millionaires around the world increase consistently year on year on year. This was very much the case pre-COVID, and of course now coming out of COVID, that's we've already returned to sort of beyond pre-COVID levels. Now in 2024, we forecast about 128,000 millionaires will physically move to another jurisdiction during the year, and that'll extend to about 135,000 in 2025. So I think I think one thing that COVID also taught us is you don't have to live outside the factory door, right? So we've seen an increase in things like nomad visas and the ability of people to work very much more remotely than maybe what the historical model showed. And so you could be sitting on a beach and still running a multi-million-dollar company, depending on what that company does. So we think it'll increase. And of course, the competition will also increase, not only on these sort of nomad visas, but more and more countries will refine, introduce, some form of residence and citizenship by investment for such, financially independent and successful individuals and families to take advantage of.
And since it has become so competitive, I'm sure it can be quite overwhelming for those looking to move and migrate. Or what are some of the starting points that they should look at when they're looking to move? I mean, obviously, you mentioned there are a number of factors involved, tax being a main one, livability, obviously, as well.
I mean, the first question we always ask is why, right? Is what exactly is the reason for considering this? Because I suppose one misconception about the sort of the larger investment migration industry is that it's all about relocation, but it's actually not. The vast majority of high net worth individuals that acquire residence or citizenship around the world don't actually move. Of course, there's a portion that do, but it's seen much more as an insurance policy or a hedge against some type of risk, right? We all know we live in a very volatile world, and every single geography around the world has something going on, whether it's economic or political or war. Of course, this is also something that comes up. So it's become much more of a hedging strategy against such volatility. And so what we see particularly for sort of ultra high net worth, centimillionaire type families, a plan B is not enough, right? Now you've got to have plan C and plan D. And so a lot of families that we work with actually develop portfolios of residence and citizenship, because what's the best way for me to protect my family? From an asset perspective, I am diversified. I invest into bonds and equities and real estate, and nowadays probably cryptocurrencies and other, alternative investments. So I think millionaires are very comfortable with diversifying asset classes and geographies in terms of their assets, but then it makes no sense that they limit themselves to one or even two jurisdictions that they can live in. So these individuals now start to build portfolios of domicile and say, look, how do I really hedge against it all? I should have residence in Panama, maybe Canada permanent residence. I should have something in Europe, whether it's a citizenship in Malta or Austria, or a golden visa in Portugal or Spain or Greece, a Dubai, Abu Dhabi golden visa to have some, exposure here in the UAE, probably something in Southeast Asia, Thailand, Malaysia are great alternatives. And then what's sort of seen as the real billionaire bolt-hole solution is New Zealand, right? So, we've assisted a lot of Silicon Valley type ultra high net worths that get permanent residence in New Zealand. Australia and New Zealand they also ranked very highly on the Climate Change Resilience Index, but these places were seen as too far away, right? But if there's a World War III or a nuclear event or who knows what happens, then the fact that I have permanent residence in New Zealand and I can go to the very furthest point away from what might be happening in Europe or elsewhere or the Middle East, that's really attractive to me, whether it's short term, medium term, or long term. But it's a backup plan that I can have now if I am, financially, if I have the financial capacity.
Just to round up, Dominic, what are some of the key trends that you see when it comes to millionaire migration in the next, say, 3 to 5 years then?
Yeah, I think the key trend, of course, is it will only increase, right? It'll increase on the demand side. So particularly, if you look at those countries that see a net outflow of millionaires, it's China, it's India, it's the UK, interestingly enough, which we mentioned earlier. But China and India, of course, are jurisdictions with significant populations, number one, but also significant wealth creation opportunities, but maybe not wealth preservation. And so you have a large number of very successful entrepreneurs who build careers, build businesses, but then ultimately look to relocate elsewhere once they get to a certain point or once there's a liquidity event. And so this demand side will only increase. Places like Vietnam and some of the African countries that have, expected to see huge spikes in millionaire growth over the next decade, the demand will only increase. And then, as we touched on, as will the supply side. So there's about 100 countries globally that have, some form of regulation or legislation in place that allows for investment migration. But only about 40% of those are actually making use of it. And so I think on the supply side, we will also see a lot more coming online and being available for savvy investors. And then, as I said, the other big trend is that one backup plan is not enough. And so, having 2, 3, or 4, if I'm allowed dual or multi-citizenship, I should absolutely have it. Of course, not everyone is born in a country that allows it. But then on the residence side, of course, I can have as many residences as I want around the world. And that's the ultimate hedge for a lot of these millionaires.
We've been speaking with Dominic Volek, who's the group head of private clients at Henley and Partners, right here on Eco Money on Money FM 89.3. I'm Rachel Kelly, and I'll be back with you next week for more eco news and views.